Millionaire loses his 13 billion fortune and goes bankrupt, and his wife kicks him out until an 8-year-old orphan girl says something that changes everything. Before we reveal this heart-rending story of solitude and sorrow, share where you're watching from and subscribe for more moving tales. The cold marble floor of the Manhattan penthouse felt like ice against Richard Montgomery's knees as he stared at the federal seizure notice in his trembling hands. 58 years old, and everything he'd built over 3 decades was gone. $13 billion vanished. "Get out." Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a blade. His wife of 22 years stood in the doorway, her designer heels clicking against the marble as she approached. The FBI finished their sweep an hour ago. This penthouse, the cars, the accounts, all frozen. Richard looked up at the woman he'd loved since she was 28, her blonde hair perfectly styled, even in this chaos. "Vicky, we can fight this. My lawyers say—" "Your lawyers?" She laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Richard, you're bankrupt, worse than bankrupt. You're toxic. I filed for divorce this morning." The words hit him like a physical blow. 22 years, Victoria. 22 years we built this life together. "I built nothing." She turned away, her voice cold as winter. "I married a successful man. That man no longer exists." The next 3 hours blurred together. Security escorted him out with a single suitcase. The Bentley, the driver, the credit cards, all gone. Richard Montgomery, once worth $13 billion, stood on Fifth Avenue with $700 in cash and nowhere to go. By evening, he found himself in Queens, at the only place his remaining pride would allow, St. Catherine's Children's Home, where he'd volunteered every Christmas for the past 5 years. Maybe Sister Margaret would let him sleep in the volunteer quarters, just until he could figure out his next move. The November rain had started, soaking through his $1,000 suit as he approached the brick building. Through the windows, he could see children gathered in the common room, their laughter a stark contrast to the storm raging in his chest. "Mr. Richard!" a small voice called out as he entered. 7-year-old Emma ran toward him, her dark curls bouncing. She'd been at St. Catherine's for 3 years, since her grandmother died. Unlike the other children, Emma had never seemed interested in being adopted. She preferred books and quiet conversations with the adults. "Hello, sweetheart." Richard forced a smile, kneeling to her level. "What are you doing up so late?" Emma's brown eyes studied his face with an intensity that always surprised him. "Sister Margaret said you might not come anymore because of troubles. Are you sad, Mr. Richard?" The question broke something inside him. This child, who had lost everything herself, was worried about him. "Yes, Emma, I am very sad." She nodded solemnly. "When I'm sad, I remember what my grandmama told me. She said sometimes the worst things happen because someone wants them to happen, not because they just happen." Richard frowned. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma glanced around, then stepped closer. "I saw your wife here once, 3 months ago. She talked to Mr. Harrison in his office for a long time. The world seemed to tilt. David Harrison was the director of St. Catherine's, but more importantly, he was Victoria's brother. Richard had never connected the two. Victoria had kept her maiden name, and Harrison was their mother's remarried surname. "Emma, are you certain?" "Too." Emma nodded gravely. She was very angry. "I heard her say your name through the door when I was walking past. She said something about making sure he loses everything, and the plan has to work perfectly." Richard's heart pounded. "What else did you hear?" "She said something about papers and a man named Blackwood, and that she'd been moving money somewhere safe." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "She scared me, Mr. Richard. She sounded mean. James Blackwood, Richard's former business partner who'd sold his shares 6 months ago claiming he wanted to retire. The same James Blackwood whose company had mysteriously received several major contracts that should have gone to Montgomery Industries." "Emma, this is very important. Did you see anything else? Papers, maybe?" She had a big folder. She left without it. Emma bit her lip. "Mr. Harrison was upset after. He put the folder in his safe, the one behind the painting of Jesus." Sister Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Emma, you should be in bed. Mr. Montgomery, I heard about your situation. You're welcome to stay in the volunteer quarters tonight." As Sister Margaret led Emma away, the little girl turned back. "Mr. Richard, my grandmama also said that when bad people hurt good people, God makes sure the truth comes out. You just have to be patient and pay attention." That night, Richard lay awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Victoria's behavior over the past months suddenly made sense. The separate bedroom, claiming he worked too much, her insistence on handling their personal finances, the way she'd encouraged him to expand the business faster, take bigger risks, and David Harrison, Victoria's brother, who'd always been friendly, who'd known every detail of Richard's business through their Christmas conversations, who had access to Richard's personal information through Victoria. At 3 a.m., Richard made his decision. He dressed quietly and slipped out of his room. The building was silent except for the heating system's gentle hum. He'd been volunteering here for 5 years. He knew every creaking floorboard to avoid. Harrison's office was on the ground floor. Richard had watched the director open his safe multiple times during budget meetings, always turning his body to block the view. But Richard had sharp eyes, honed by decades of business negotiations. The combination was Emma's birthday, the date Harrison had sentimentally chosen when she'd arrived, claiming she reminded him of his own daughter. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were financial documents, adoption records, and there, a thick folder marked Montgomery Industries, private. Richard's hands shook as he opened it. The contents were devastating. Bank routing numbers for accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Forged documents showing fictional business deals. Most damning of all, a contract between Victoria Montgomery and James Blackwood, dated 8 months ago, outlining their plan to systematically drain Montgomery Industries' assets while positioning Blackwood's company to absorb the client base. But the final page made his blood run cold. It was a memo in Victoria's handwriting. Phase 3. Once bankruptcy is complete and assets seized, wait 6 months, then liquidate offshore accounts. Estimated total $8. $2 billion, split 60-40 as agreed. Victoria hadn't just left him. She'd orchestrated his complete destruction while stealing over $8 billion. Money that would eventually surface in accounts she controlled, looking like wise investments made before their divorce. A sound in the hallway made Richard freeze. Footsteps. He quickly photographed every page with his phone, returned the folder, and closed the safe. The footsteps passed by the office door. As dawn broke over Queens, Richard sat in the children's home chapel, the evidence of his wife's betrayal glowing on his phone screen. 22 years of marriage, 22 years of what he'd thought was love. Emma appeared beside him, carrying a worn teddy bear. "Did you find what you were looking for, Mr. Richard?" He looked at this remarkable child who'd given him the key to his salvation. "Yes, sweetheart, I found exactly what I needed." "Good." She climbed onto the pew beside him. "Now what are you going to do?" Richard Montgomery, who 12 hours ago had nothing, now had something more valuable than money. He had the truth. And he had a 7-year-old guardian angel who delivered it to him. "Now, Emma, we're going to make sure the bad people face justice." 03. 3 days later, Richard sat in a cramped legal aid office in downtown Brooklyn, facing attorney Sarah Chen. At 35, she was young, overworked, and initially skeptical of the disheveled man claiming to be a former billionaire. But the evidence on Richard's phone had changed everything. "This is unprecedented," Sarah said, reviewing the photographs for the 3rd time. "Your wife essentially conducted the largest theft in New York history while framing you for financial crimes you didn't commit." Richard nodded. He'd been staying at a YMCA in Queens, his $700 now down to $400. "The FBI agents who seized my assets, they never looked for offshore accounts because they assumed all the money was lost in bad investments. Victoria made sure they saw exactly what she wanted them to see. The problem is proving these documents are authentic. Harrison could claim they're forgeries or that his safe was compromised. Sarah leaned back in her chair. We need corroborating evidence. What kind of evidence? Bank records, communication between your wife and Blackwood, witnesses to their meetings, something that proves this conspiracy existed before your company collapsed. Richard's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Richard, Sister Margaret says you're in trouble with lawyers. I remember something else about the mean lady. Can you come to the home? Emma. 20 minutes later, Richard was back at St. Catherine's. Emma waited in the garden, her small hands clutching a notebook. I remembered something important, she said. The day your wife came, I was hiding because I was reading a book I wasn't supposed to have, but I saw her meet with another man first before she talked to Mr. Harrison. Richard knelt beside her. What did this man look like? Old like you, but with white hair, really white, and he had a scary voice. Emma opened her notebook, revealing a surprisingly detailed pencil drawing. I drew him so I wouldn't forget. The sketch showed a man with distinctive features, sharp cheekbones, thin lips, and piercing eyes. But it was the small scar above the left eyebrow that made Richard's heart race. James Blackwood. He'd gotten that scar in a sailing accident 15 years ago. Emma, where did they meet? In the parking lot, in his black car. They argued about something. The man kept pointing at papers and your wife kept shaking her head. Then she got out and slammed the door really hard. Richard felt pieces clicking into place. Did you hear anything they said? Some words. The man said something about moving too fast and the timeline. Your wife said Richard suspects nothing, and something about Christmas bonuses. Emma frowned. What's a Christmas bonus? Richard almost smiled despite everything. Last Christmas, he'd given every employee a substantial bonus, praising the company's record profits. Profits that, he now realized, were artificially inflated by money being funneled back into the company from accounts Victoria controlled. She'd been fattening the company for slaughter. Emma, this is very important. Do you remember the date this happened? She nodded. August 15th, it was my birthday. Sister Margaret was making my cake, and I was sad because no one was coming to my party except the other kids. Her voice dropped. That's why I was hiding with the book. August 15th. Richard pulled out his phone and scrolled through his calendar. On August 16th, Victoria had suggested they take a second honeymoon to celebrate their success. A trip to Switzerland, where she'd insisted on visiting several banks to explore international investment opportunities. Now he understood. She'd been opening accounts, moving money, setting up the infrastructure for the theft. And he'd been so grateful for her renewed interest in their relationship that he'd given her power of attorney to handle their personal finances while he focused on the business. Mr. Richard? Emma's voice was small. Are you going to be okay? He looked at this extraordinary child who'd already given him more help than anyone else in his life. Emma, would you be willing to tell this story to some other people, people who could help us catch the bad people? Will it help you get your money back? It might help me get something more important than money. It might help me get justice. Emma straightened her small shoulders. Grandmama always said we have to stand up to bullies, even when we're scared. That evening, Richard called Sarah Chen. I have a witness, a 7-year-old girl who can place Victoria and Blackwood together 3 months before my company collapsed, discussing their timeline. A child witness is complicated, but... Sarah paused. Richard, I've been doing some digging. James Blackwood's company received over $200 million in contracts from firms that used to work exclusively with Montgomery Industries, all within the past 6 months. Someone convinced them to switch. Or someone with intimate knowledge of your business practices and client relationships systematically undermined your reputation while positioning Blackwood as the better alternative. Sarah's voice hardened. We're not just talking about theft, Richard. This was a calculated campaign to destroy your life. As Richard hung up, he realized that Victoria's betrayal ran deeper than money. She'd stolen his reputation, his relationships, his identity. She'd tried to erase Richard Montgomery completely, but she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated the power of a 7-year-old girl with a memory like a steel trap and a grandmother who taught her that justice matters. Richard Montgomery, was far from finished. 04. FBI Special Agent Maria Rodriguez had seen many cases in her 15-year career, but the evidence spread across her desk defied belief. The photographs from Harrison's safe, Emma's detailed testimony, and the banking records Sarah Chen had subpoenaed painted a picture of financial conspiracy that reached the highest levels of New York society. Mrs. Montgomery has been very cooperative, Agent Rodriguez told Richard during their second meeting. Perhaps too cooperative. Richard frowned. What do you mean? When we approached her yesterday about your allegations, she immediately provided us with complete financial records, expressed shock and dismay, and offered to help in any way possible. Rodriguez leaned forward. In 30 years of investigating financial crimes, guilty parties don't behave this way. They lawyer up, they deflect, they deny. Your wife acted like someone with nothing to hide. Richard's heart sank. You think she's innocent. I think she's very, very smart. Rodriguez opened a new file. The records she provided show a pattern of you making increasingly erratic financial decisions over the past year. Large cash withdrawals, risky investments, aggressive expansion, all documented with your electronic signature. I never made those decisions. According to the bank records, you did. According to her testimony, she tried to stop you multiple times, but you refused to listen, claiming the business pressures were too intense. Rodriguez's voice was carefully neutral. She even has recordings of arguments where you allegedly dismissed her concerns. Richard felt the room spinning. She recorded our private conversations? Apparently, she was gathering evidence for what she anticipated would be a difficult divorce. Very prescient of her. Rodriguez paused. Mr. Montgomery, is it possible that the stress of your business affected your judgment? That you made decisions you don't clearly remember? No. Richard's voice was firm. Agent Rodriguez, I've been making complex financial decisions for 30 years. I don't make 8-figure investments without extensive analysis. Yet the records show you did exactly that, multiple times. Richard stared at the agent. Victoria had been more thorough than he'd imagined. Not only had she stolen his money, she'd created a complete alternate narrative where he was the reckless one, where she was the concerned wife trying to save their marriage and finances. What about the documents Emma saw, the meetings with Blackwood? Mr. Harrison claims his safe was never compromised. He says any documents about Montgomery Industries would have been legitimate financial records from your charitable donations. Rodriguez's tone was sympathetic but firm. As for the child's testimony, Mr. Blackwood has travel records showing he was in London during the dates in question. Richard felt his last hope crumbling. Those records could be falsified. They could be, but proving that requires resources we don't have unless we can establish probable cause for a broader investigation. Rodriguez closed the file. Mr. Montgomery, I believe someone orchestrated your financial ruin, but beliefs aren't evidence. That evening, Richard sat with Emma in St. Catherine's garden. The November cold had deepened, and most of the children were inside watching television. Emma wore a worn winter coat that was too big for her, making her look even smaller. The FBI lady didn't believe us, did she? Emma asked. Richard had tried to keep the disappointment from his voice during their brief conversation, but Emma was perceptive beyond her years. She believes us, sweetheart. She just needs more proof. What kind of proof? The kind that shows your wife is lying about the recordings, about the meetings, about everything. He paused. Emma, when you saw Victoria and Blackwood arguing in the car, you said she got out and slammed the door. What happened next? Emma closed her eyes, concentrating. She walked to the building, but then she turned around and went back to the car. She was carrying something, a big envelope. She leaned in the window and gave it to him. Richard's pulse quickened. An envelope, brown and fat, like the ones Sister Margaret uses for important papers. Emma opened her eyes. The man looked inside it, then nodded. Then your wife came into the building. An exchange of documents, something Victoria had given Blackwood, something important enough to make him travel from London to Queens to receive it personally, despite what his falsified travel records claimed. Emma, I need you to think very carefully. After Victoria went inside, did you see the man again? He didn't leave right away. He sat in his car for a long time, looking at the papers. Then he made a phone call. He was talking loud, angry, loud. I heard some words. What words? Emma's voice dropped to a whisper, mimicking what she'd overheard. She's moving too fast. No, the timing is critical. He's already suspicious about the Swiss accounts. Richard's blood froze. In August, he hadn't known about any Swiss accounts. But Victoria had opened them during their second honeymoon trip, and somehow Blackwood had known about them before they existed. Emma, are you absolutely certain those were his words? Grandmama taught me to pay attention to grown-ups when they're angry or scared, because that's when they tell the truth. Emma looked up at him with those wise brown eyes. He was both. Richard pulled out his phone and called Sarah Chen. Sarah, I need you to subpoena Blackwood's phone records for August 15th. And I need to know if there's any way to prove he was in New York that day, despite his travel records. Richard, the FBI already looked into... The FBI looked at official records. But what if those records are lies? What if someone with access to multiple passports and private jets wanted to create a false alibi? Sarah was quiet for a moment. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Richard looked at Emma, who was listening intently. Sarah, a 7-year-old girl may have witnessed the moment when two conspirators exchanged the evidence that would destroy my life. We just have to prove she's telling the truth. Of 5, Sarah Chen worked through the weekend, calling in favors from private investigators and forensic accountants she'd worked with in previous cases. By Monday morning, she had information that made Richard's heart race. Blackwood owns 3 passports, Sarah explained over coffee at a diner near St. Catherine's, British, American and Swiss. On August 15th, his British passport shows he was in London. But his American passport has no entry or exit stamps for that entire week. Richard leaned forward. Meaning? Meaning someone with multiple passports can create false alibis by using different documents for different parts of their travel. If he flew to New York using his American passport and returned to London using his British one, official records would show him continuously in London. Can we prove it? Sarah nodded grimly. Private jet manifests don't require the same passport documentation as commercial flights. I found a charter company that flew a J. Blackwell from Teterboro Airport to London on August 15th at 11 p.m. Close enough to J. Blackwood to be a deliberate alias. Richard felt the first spark of hope he'd had in days. What about the phone call Emma overheard? That's where it gets interesting. Sarah pulled out her laptop. Cell phone companies keep detailed records of tower connections, even for calls that don't go through. On August 15th at 4:47 p.m., a number registered to Blackwood's company connected to cell towers in Queens for exactly 12 minutes. The same time, Emma saw him in the parking lot. The same time, she heard him talking about Swiss accounts that wouldn't officially exist for another 3 weeks. Sarah's voice hardened. Richard, your wife and Blackwood didn't just steal from you. They created an elaborate false narrative to cover their tracks, including falsified travel records and forged business documents. That afternoon, Richard and Sarah met with FBI agent Rodriguez again. This time, the agent's skepticism had vanished. The phone records are damning, Rodriguez admitted, but what really caught our attention was the banking analysis. Every reckless investment decision attributed to you was followed within 48 hours by a corresponding deposit into accounts connected to Blackwood's company. Richard felt vindicated, but anger burned in his chest. So Victoria would forge my electronic signature on a bad investment, then Blackwood would profit from the loss. It's more sophisticated than that. Rodriguez opened her laptop. The investments weren't random. Each one involved companies that were about to go bankrupt. Your wife somehow knew which firms were about to collapse and convinced you to invest heavily in them just before they failed. How could she know that information? Victoria Montgomery sits on the boards of 3 major investment firms and 2 banks. She had access to confidential information about company health, pending bankruptcies, market manipulation schemes. Rodriguez's tone was flat. She used insider information to systematically destroy your wealth while enriching her co-conspirators. Sarah leaned forward. What about the recordings where she claims to have warned Richard about his reckless behavior? Audio analysis shows they were edited. Conversations that allegedly took place over several months were actually created from snippets of different phone calls, rearranged to support her narrative. Rodriguez closed the laptop. Mrs. Montgomery is a very sophisticated criminal. That evening, Richard walked through the halls of St. Catherine's, processing the magnitude of what he'd learned. Victoria hadn't just betrayed him. She'd orchestrated one of the most complex financial crimes in modern history, and she'd almost gotten away with it. Emma appeared beside him, carrying her notebook. "Mr. Richard, you look different today, less sad." "The FBI believes us now, sweetheart. They know you were telling the truth." Emma nodded seriously. "Grandmama always said the truth is like water. It finds a way to flow out, even when people try to dam it up. Your grandmama was a wise woman. She also said that when bad people hurt good people, it's not enough just to catch them. You have to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Emma looked up at him. "Are you going to make sure the mean lady can't hurt other people?" Richard knelt to her level. "Emma, what your grandmother said is very important. This isn't just about getting my money back. Victoria and her friends have probably hurt other people too." "How do you know?" "Because people who can plan something this complicated don't usually do it just once. They practice. They get better at it." Richard's voice hardened. "I think Victoria Montgomery has been destroying lives for years." Emma's eyes widened. "Other people like you? Other people like me? Men and women who trusted the wrong person and lost everything." Richard stood up. "Tomorrow, Emma, we're going to help the FBI find out just how many people Victoria has hurt." As Richard tucked Emma into bed that night, she grabbed his hand. "Mr. Richard, when this is all over, when the bad people are caught, will you still come visit us?" The question hit him unexpectedly. This child, who had given him everything, was worried about being abandoned again. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. You saved my life. You're the bravest, smartest person I know." He squeezed her small hand. "No matter what happens, you'll always be my guardian angel." Emma smiled sleepily. "Good, because I think you're going to need more help before this is over." Richard had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. 06. The FBI raid on Victoria Montgomery's penthouse happened at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Richard wasn't allowed to be present, but Agent Rodriguez called him immediately afterward with news that shook him to his core. "We found evidence of at least 17 other victims," Rodriguez said. "Victoria has been running this scheme for 8 years, targeting wealthy men going through difficult periods, divorces, business troubles, family crises." Richard sat in stunned silence in the St. Catherine's common room, Emma coloring quietly beside him. "The pattern was always the same," Rodriguez continued. "She'd identify vulnerable targets, create romantic relationships, gain access to their finances, then systematically drain their assets while building legal cases to protect herself. 17 other men? 17 we can identify so far. Total theft appears to exceed $42 billion. Rodriguez's voice was grim. "Richard, your wife is one of the most successful con artists in American history." Richard thought about all those times Victoria had seemed to know exactly what to say, exactly how to make him feel better during stressful business periods. How she'd encouraged him to take risks, to trust her with more responsibility, to give her greater access to his financial world. "There's more," Rodriguez said. "We found evidence that she's been planning to disappear. False identities, bank accounts in non-extradition countries, even a house in Paraguay purchased under an assumed name." "When?" "The timeline in her personal notes suggests Christmas. She was going to wait until the holiday season to maximize emotional impact, then vanish with approximately $9 billion. Richard felt sick. On Christmas morning, he would have woken up alone, completely destroyed. while Victoria enjoyed tropical beaches funded by his life's work. Agent Rodriguez, what happens now? Now we build the case. And frankly, Mr. Montgomery, we need your help. You understand the financial details better than anyone, and your testimony will be crucial for the other victims. After hanging up, Richard sat with Emma in the garden. The December cold was bitter, but Emma had insisted they needed thinking air. The FBI lady sounded excited, Emma observed. She caught the bad people. That's good news. But you don't sound happy. Richard considered how to explain to a 7-year-old that learning your wife never loved you, that your entire marriage was an elaborate lie, somehow hurt worse than losing the money. Sometimes when you find out the truth, it makes you sad, even when it also makes you free. Emma nodded solemnly. Like when I found out my mommy wasn't coming back, even though people told me she was. The simple parallel hit Richard hard. This child understood betrayal and loss in ways most adults never would. Emma, can I ask you something? Why did you decide to help me that first night? You could have just ignored what you'd seen. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small hands folded in her lap. After my grandmama died, lots of grown-ups made promises they didn't keep. Social workers, foster families, even some people here, but you always kept your promises. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time you said you'd come back, you came back. She looked up at him with those wise brown eyes. When I saw how sad you were, I thought maybe someone was breaking promises to you too. And I don't like people who break promises to good people. Richard felt tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed throughout this entire ordeal. This child had seen through to his character in a way his wife of 22 years never had. Emma, I have something to tell you, something important. She straightened, sensing the seriousness in his tone. The FBI is going to arrest Victoria and her friends. There will be trials and legal proceedings, but there's something else. Victoria stole money from lots of people, and when we get it back, I'll have more money than I could ever spend. Emma nodded, not sure where this was leading. I want to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Richard took a deep breath. Emma, would you like to come live with me? Would you like me to adopt you and be your father? Emma's eyes went wide. You mean forever, like a real family? Like a real family. Forever. Emma was quiet for so long. Richard began to worry he'd moved too fast, been too presumptuous. Then she launched herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. Yes! She whispered fiercely against his shoulder. Yes, yes, yes! As Richard held this remarkable child who had saved his life in every way that mattered, he realized that Victoria's betrayal had given him something she never could have, the chance to build a real family based on love, loyalty, and truth. The legal battles ahead would be complex and painful, but Richard Montgomery was no longer facing them alone. He had Emma, and Emma had him. And together they were going to make sure justice prevailed. 2 weeks later, Richard sat in the Manhattan District Attorney's office, watching Victoria Montgomery enter the room in handcuffs. She looked different, older, her perfectly styled blonde hair now showing grey roots, her designer clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit. But her eyes still held that calculating coldness he'd learned to recognize too late. Mrs. Montgomery, District Attorney Patricia Wells began. You're facing charges of wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Victoria's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Stevens, leaned forward. My client maintains her innocence. These charges are based on the fantasies of a bitter ex-husband and the unreliable testimony of a disturbed child. Richard felt his jaw clench. Emma wasn't disturbed. She was the sanest person he'd ever met. Let's review the evidence, D.A. Wells continued, opening a thick file. Phone records place your client's co-conspirator, James Blackwood, in Queens on dates when he was supposedly in London. Audio analysis proves your client fabricated recordings to frame her husband, and financial records show a clear pattern of insider trading and fraud spanning 8 years. Stevens remained unmoved. Circumstantial evidence assembled by investigators desperate to close a high-profile case. But Victoria herself had been silent throughout the meeting, studying Richard with those cold blue eyes. Finally, she spoke. "Richard looks well," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone that once made his heart race. "Considering he's living in a children's home with his new daughter." The way she said daughter made Richard's blood boil. But before he could respond, Victoria continued, "I wonder what the adoption agency will think when they learn about Richard's recent instability. His financial recklessness, his paranoid accusations, his tendency to form inappropriate attachments to vulnerable children." D.A. Wells interrupted. "Mrs. Montgomery, anything you say can and will be used against you." Victoria smiled. That same smile that had charmed him for 22 years. "I'm not confessing to anything. I'm simply expressing concern for a child's welfare. After all, Richard has demonstrated such poor judgment lately. Who knows what he might do next?" Richard understood the threat immediately. Victoria was going to attack his fitness as a father, try to prevent the adoption. Even from jail, she was still trying to destroy everything he loved. That evening, Richard called Sarah Chen from St. Catherine's. Emma was at his side, sensing his distress even though he'd tried to hide it. "She can't stop the adoption, can she?" Richard asked. "It's complicated," Sarah admitted. "Your recent financial troubles could be seen as instability, and Victoria's lawyers will argue that your attachment to Emma is unhealthy, a damaged man seeking comfort from a vulnerable child." Richard felt sick. "What do? We prove that you're exactly the kind of father Emma needs. And we prove that Victoria's attacks are just another part of her criminal pattern." Emma tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Mr. Richard, is the mean lady trying to hurt us again?" Richard knelt to her level. "She's trying, sweetheart, but she's not going to succeed." "How do you know?" "Because this time, I know what she really is, and I'm not going to let her win." But privately, Richard was terrified. Losing Emma would be worse than losing the money. Victoria had found the one weapon that could still destroy him completely. The next morning brought unexpected news. Agent Rodriguez called with information that changed everything. "Richard, we found Victoria's real target list. It wasn't just about stealing money. She was building a network. Each victim she destroyed was connected to other wealthy individuals. She was systematically mapping the financial elite of America. For what purpose? We think she was working for someone else. Someone who wanted detailed intelligence on how America's wealthiest families operate, where their vulnerabilities are, how to bring down the entire system." Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. "You're talking about economic espionage. We're talking about financial terrorism. Victoria Montgomery wasn't just a con artist, Richard. She was a foreign asset, and you were her way into the heart of American capitalism." As Richard hung up the phone, he realized that his personal nightmare was part of something much larger and more dangerous. Victoria hadn't just stolen his money, she'd used him to threaten national security. And now she was using Emma to ensure his silence. The courtroom was packed when Victoria Montgomery's trial began in January. Richard sat in the gallery next to Emma, who wore her best dress, a simple blue outfit that Sister Margaret had bought for the occasion. Despite everything, Richard was proud of how composed the 8-year-old looked. Her birthday had passed quietly at St. Catherine's while they waited for the legal proceedings to begin. Victoria's defense team had spent weeks trying to paint Richard as an unstable man whose business failures had driven him to paranoid delusions. They'd called witnesses who testified about his erratic behavior in the months before his company collapsed. Behavior that Richard now understood was his natural response to Victoria's systematic sabotage. But today was different. Today, Emma would testify. "Your Honor," Stevens addressed the judge, "we object to allowing a child to testify in this complex financial case. The defendant has the right to confront her accusers, and an 8-year-old cannot be considered a reliable witness to sophisticated criminal conspiracy." Judge Harrison, no relation to the children's home director, considered the objection carefully. The witness will be examined in chambers with only essential personnel present. If I determine her testimony is relevant and reliable, it will be admitted. An hour later, Emma sat in the judge's private office, her small hands folded in her lap. Richard and the lawyers watched as Judge Harrison spoke gently to her. "Emma, do you understand the difference between the truth and a lie?" "Yes, ma'am. The truth is what really happened. A lie is when you say something that didn't happen to help yourself or hurt someone else." "And you promise to tell the truth today?" "I promise. My grandmama said lying makes God sad, and it makes the person lying feel bad inside." Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. For the next 30 minutes, Emma recounted everything she'd witnessed: Victoria's meeting with Blackwood, the angry phone call, the exchange of documents. Her memory was precise, her descriptions detailed, her certainty unwavering. Stevens tried to rattle her. "Emma, isn't it true that you don't like Mrs. Montgomery because she took away your friend Mr. Richard?" Emma considered this seriously. "I don't like Mrs. Montgomery because she's mean and she hurt people, but I didn't know she hurt Mr. Richard until after I saw her being mean at our home." "Isn't it possible you imagined some of what you think you saw?" "No, sir. I have a very good memory. Sister Margaret says I remember things other people forget because I pay attention." Emma's voice was clear and confident. "I remember everything about that day because it was my birthday, and I was sad." Stevens pressed harder. "Emma, has Mr. Richard promised you anything for testifying today? A new home, perhaps? Toys? Special treatment?" Emma's brown eyes flashed with something that reminded Richard powerfully of her grandmother's strength. "Mr. Richard never promised me anything for telling the truth. He only promised to be my daddy if I wanted him to be. And I want him to be because he's good and kind, and he keeps his promises." Judge Harrison called a recess. When court resumed, she announced her decision. "The witness's testimony will be admitted." Testimony. Emma Chen demonstrates exceptional recall, consistency, and honesty. Her observations provide crucial evidence of the defendant's conspiracy. Victoria's face remained impassive, but Richard caught the flash of fury in her eyes. That afternoon, the prosecution called its star witness, James Blackwood himself. Facing 40 years in prison, he'd agreed to cooperate fully. "Yes, I conspired with Victoria Montgomery to defraud multiple victims over 8 years, Blackwood testified. "The operation was sophisticated and international in scope." "Who initiated the conspiracy?" D.A. Wells asked. "Victoria did. She approached me in 2017 with a detailed plan to systematically target wealthy Americans. She had access through her board positions and social connections. I provided the international banking expertise and money laundering capabilities." "Was Mrs. Montgomery working alone?" Blackwood hesitated, then shook his head. "No. Victoria was reporting to a handler, someone she called the director. I never met this person, but Victoria received detailed instructions about which targets to pursue and what information to gather." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Richard felt Emma's small hand slip into his. "Mr. Blackwood, are you suggesting this was more than financial crime?" "I'm saying Victoria Montgomery was conducting economic espionage against the United States. The money was secondary. The primary goal was intelligence gathering about American financial institutions and the wealthy individuals who control them." Richard's worst fears were confirmed. Victoria hadn't just betrayed him personally, she'd used their marriage to betray their entire country. As they left the courthouse that evening, Emma looked up at him thoughtfully. "Mr. Richard, does this mean the mean lady is a spy?" "It means she's worse than we thought, sweetheart." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction. "Now everyone will know she's really, really bad, and they'll make sure she can't hurt anyone else." Richard hoped his 8-year-old daughter was right, but he had a feeling Victoria Montgomery still had surprises left to reveal. The revelation that Victoria was a foreign asset sent shockwaves through the trial. FBI counterintelligence agents took over the investigation, and Richard found himself in a secure federal facility being debriefed about every detail of his marriage. "Think carefully, Mr. Montgomery. Agent Sarah Kim from the FBI's National Security Division urged. In 22 years of marriage, Victoria must have asked questions about your business associates, your clients, your financial strategies. We need to understand exactly what intelligence she gathered. Richard sat across from Agent Kim, feeling the weight of his unwitting betrayal. Emma was in a nearby room, drawing pictures, while a child psychologist ensured she was coping with the stress of the situation. She knew everything, Richard admitted. Client lists, investment strategies, personal information about some of America's wealthiest families. She attended every business dinner, every charity gala, every private meeting I had in our home. What about international connections? Did she ever encourage you to pursue business overseas? Richard's blood chilled as memories surfaced. 2 years ago, she suggested I explore opportunities in Eastern Europe. She arranged meetings with investors in Prague, Budapest, Moscow. She said it would be good for our relationship to travel together more. Agent Kim leaned forward. These investors, did Victoria already know them? She claimed she'd met them through her board connections, but Richard paused, remembering. They knew things about me, personal details that I hadn't shared, details that only Victoria could have provided. Mr. Montgomery, we believe your wife was facilitating the transfer of classified economic intelligence to foreign agents. Your business network gave her access to information about defense contracts, government financial policies, even Federal Reserve decisions through your connections. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Victoria had turned Richard into an unwitting agent of economic espionage, using their marriage to compromise national security. There's something else, Agent Kim continued. We've been monitoring communications from the federal prison where Victoria is being held. She's been using a prisoner communication system to send coded messages. To whom? We're still tracking that. But Mr. Montgomery, these messages suggest that Victoria's arrest was anticipated. Someone prepared contingency plans. Richard felt a familiar chill of fear. What kind of contingency plans? The kind that involve eliminating loose ends. That evening, Richard and Emma were moved to a safe house in Virginia. The modest suburban home felt strange after the grandeur of Richard's former penthouse and the institutional simplicity of St. Catherine's, but it was secure. Emma adapted with the resilience that constantly amazed Richard. She set up her few belongings in the bedroom they'd assigned her and immediately began exploring the small backyard. Mr. Richard, she called from the kitchen window, there are rabbits out here. Richard joined her, grateful for any distraction from the nightmare his life had become. 3 small rabbits were indeed grazing in the twilight, their white tails visible against the brown winter grass. They're beautiful, he said, putting his arm around Emma's shoulders. Grandmama used to say that when bad things happen, God sends small, beautiful things to remind us that goodness is still in the world. Emma leaned against him. Maybe the rabbits are a good sign. Richard hoped she was right, but the FBI's security measures suggested they were still in danger. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Kim. Need to see you immediately. New developments. An hour later, Richard sat in a secure briefing room while Emma slept safely at the house under federal protection. We identified Victoria's handler, Agent Kim announced. Codename the Director, real name Alexei Volkov, former KGB, now heading a private intelligence firm that contracts with several hostile foreign governments. Where is he? Unknown. But Mr. Montgomery, we intercepted his latest communication to Victoria. He's activating what he calls final protocol. Richard's stomach dropped. Which means what? Which means Volkov has decided that Victoria knows too much to be left alive, and that you and Emma represent unacceptable security risks. Agent Kim pulled up a classified file on her laptop. Volkov's firm specializes in what they call permanent solutions to security problems. They've been linked to 17 suspicious deaths across 3 countries, all people who could have exposed their operations. You're saying they want to kill us? I'm saying they're going to try, but Mr. Montgomery, we're not going to let that happen. You and Emma are under federal protection. And we're going to use Victoria's trial to expose this entire network. As Richard drove back to the safe house, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd been a billionaire businessman worried about market fluctuations and board meetings. Now he was a federal witness whose life depended on staying one step ahead of international assassins. But he also had Emma, sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, trusting him to keep her safe. The 8-year-old who'd saved his life was now his responsibility to protect. And protect her he would, no matter what Volkov and his people tried to do. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Richard woke to the sound of breaking glass and Agent Thompson's urgent voice. "Package is compromised. Moving to secondary location." Emma was awake instantly, her survival instincts honed by years of uncertainty. "Mr. Richard, are the bad people here?" "Yes, sweetheart, but the good people are here too." Richard scooped her up, grateful for the evacuation drills the FBI had insisted on. They had 30 seconds to reach the panic room in the basement. Gunfire erupted from the front of the house. Through the bedroom window, Richard could see muzzle flashes in the pre-dawn darkness. Professional killers had found them, despite the FBI's best efforts. Agent Thompson appeared in the doorway, blood streaming from a head wound. "Sir, we need to go now." They made it to the basement as the front door exploded inward. Richard could hear boots on the hardwood floors above, voices speaking in what sounded like Russian. Emma pressed against his chest, silent but alert. "Papa," she whispered, the first time she'd used that word. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby girl, I promise." The panic room was equipped with communications gear. Agent Thompson was already calling for backup while applying pressure to his wound. "ETA on reinforcements is 12 minutes, he reported. "We don't have 12 minutes, Richard replied, listening to the systematic search happening above them. "They know we're here." Thompson nodded grimly. "There's an escape tunnel. It leads to a drainage culvert 3 blocks away. But, sir, I can't make that run with this injury." "Then we go without you." "Negative. My job is to protect you both." Thompson checked his weapon. "I'll hold them here as long as possible. You get the girl to safety." Richard understood what the agent was offering, his life for theirs. "Agent Thompson, sir, that little girl exposed an international espionage ring. She's more valuable to national security than any of us." Thompson's voice was firm. "Get her out of here." The tunnel was cramped and dark, barely wide enough for Richard to crawl through while carrying Emma. Behind them, they could hear gunfire as Agent Thompson made his stand. "Is the nice man going to be okay?" Emma whispered. Richard couldn't lie to her. "I don't know, sweetheart, but he's very brave, and he's doing his job." They emerged from the drainage culvert into grey morning light. Richard's phone had a single bar of signal. He called the emergency number Agent Kim had given him. "We're out," he reported tersely, giving their location. "Stay put. Extraction team is 2 minutes away." But as Richard scanned the suburban street, he saw a black SUV turning the corner, moving too fast for the residential neighborhood. The windows were tinted, and something about the vehicle's approach set off every alarm in his head. "Emma, we need to run." They sprinted across backyards, through gardens, past startled homeowners letting their dogs out for morning walks. Behind them, Richard could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting in foreign languages. Emma's small legs couldn't maintain the pace. Richard picked her up again, his lungs burning as he pushed toward the main road where FBI backup would hopefully intercept them. "Mr. Richard," Emma gasped, "there's a man with a gun behind us." Richard risked a glance back. A figure in black tactical gear was pursuing them, weapon drawn. Professional, methodical, closing distance. They reached the main road, just as FBI vehicles came screaming around the corner. The tactical situation shifted instantly. The lone pursuer retreated rather than engage multiple federal agents. Agent Kim was out of the lead vehicle before it fully stopped. "Are you hurt?" "We're okay," Richard panted. "But Agent Thompson, KIA, along with 2 of the attackers." Kim's voice was professionally controlled, but Richard could see the anger in her eyes. "Mr. Montgomery, this changes everything. Volkov has declared open war." As they drove toward a new safe house, Emma sat quietly beside Richard, processing what they'd just experienced. "Papa," she said finally, "the man who died to protect us, he was good like my grandmama, wasn't he?" "Yes, baby girl, he was very good. Then we have to make sure what he did matters. We have to stop the bad people so other families don't get hurt." Richard looked at his 8-year-old daughter, this remarkable child who understood justice and sacrifice better than most adults, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Emma, what if I told you there was a way to stop the bad people, but it would be dangerous for us?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. Would it help other children like me, children who don't have anyone to protect them? "Yes, it would help a lot of people." Emma nodded firmly. "Then we have to do it. Grandmama always said that when you can help people, you don't get to choose whether it's safe or not. You just have to help." Agent Kim, listening from the front seat, turned back to look at them. "Mr. Montgomery, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to stop running and start fighting back." The plan was audacious and dangerous. Use Victoria's sentencing hearing to draw Volkov into the open. Richard would testify publicly about the full scope of the espionage operation, making himself irresistible bait for the Russian operative who needed him silenced. "Absolutely not," Agent Kim said when Richard first proposed it. "We're talking about using you as live bait for one of the world's most dangerous assassins. You're talking about ending this," Richard countered. "How many other families will Volkov destroy while we hide in safe houses? How many other children will lose their parents to his operations?" They were in a secure FBI facility outside Washington. D.C. Emma was in an adjacent room with a child psychologist, drawing pictures of the rabbits they'd seen at the last safe house. Her resilience continued to amaze Richard, but he could see the stress in the dark circles under her eyes. Agent Kim pulled up files on her computer. "Volkov has evaded capture for 15 years. He's suspected in dozens of murders, but we've never been able to prove anything. He's a ghost." "Ghosts become real when they're desperate," Richard replied. "Right now, Volkov knows that Victoria can implicate him in federal court. If I testify about the intelligence she gathered, about the foreign contacts she facilitated, he'll have to act. And when he does, you'll be dead. Not if you're ready for him." The FBI's counterintelligence division spent 3 days planning the operation. The courthouse would be secured, with federal agents posing as court personnel, journalists and spectators. Snipers would cover every possible vantage point. Electronic surveillance would monitor all communications within a 2-mile radius. But Richard's most important protection would be Emma herself. "I don't understand," she said when he explained the plan. "How can I help catch the bad man?" "By being exactly who you are, sweetheart. Smart, observant, and honest." Richard knelt to her level. "During the hearing, you'll be in a special room where you can see everything but stay safe. If you notice anything unusual, anything that doesn't feel right, you tell Agent Kim immediately." Emma nodded seriously. "Like when I saw the mean lady and knew she was dangerous." "Exactly like that." The morning of Victoria's sentencing, the federal courthouse in Manhattan was locked down tighter than a military base. Richard walked through multiple security checkpoints, each one reminding him that his life depended on the FBI's preparation. Victoria looked different in the defendant's chair, smaller, older, defeated. The months in federal prison had stripped away her artificial confidence. But when she saw Richard enter the courtroom, her eyes still held that familiar coldness. "Your Honor," D.A. Wells began, "before we proceed to sentencing, the prosecution has additional testimony that goes to the heart of this defendant's crimes against national security." Judge Harrison nodded. "Mr. Montgomery, you may proceed." For the next 2 hours, Richard laid out everything. The foreign contacts Victoria had arranged, the intelligence she'd gathered, the classified information she'd accessed through his business relationships. He named names, dates, locations, creating a public record that would destroy Volkov's entire network. Victoria's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. Richard had just painted a target on himself that Volkov couldn't ignore. "Your Honor," Richard concluded, "Victoria Montgomery didn't just steal money. She weaponized marriage itself, turning love and trust into tools of espionage. The 17 families she destroyed, the national security secrets she compromised, the American citizens she betrayed, these crimes demand the maximum penalty." As Richard left the witness stand, he caught Victoria's eye one final time. She was no longer the woman he'd married, no longer the person he'd thought he knew. She was revealed completely. A predator who destroyed lives for money and ideology. Judge Harrison sentenced Victoria Montgomery to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. As the courtroom cleared, Agent Kim's voice crackled through Richard's earpiece. Possible target acquired. Male, mid-50s, Observer Gallery, Section 3, moving to intercept. But Emma's voice came through even clearer on the secure channel. "Papa, the bad man isn't in the big room. He's in the hallway by the back stairs. I can see him through the camera screen." Richard felt his blood freeze. Volkov had anticipated the FBI's security measures and positioned himself outside their perimeter. "Emma, can you describe him?" "White hair, dark coat, and Papa, he has the same scary eyes as the mean lady, like they don't care about hurting people." Agent Kim was already moving. "All units, target is not in courtroom. Repeat, target is in the building but outside primary security zone." The next few minutes unfolded like a deadly chess game. FBI agents converged on the back stairs while Richard was evacuated through the main entrance. But Volkov was a professional. He'd already anticipated their response and melted away into the crowded streets of Manhattan. "We lost him," Agent Kim reported grimly, "but Emma's identification was perfect. We have facial recognition, gait analysis, everything we need to track him." As they drove away from the courthouse, Emma leaned against Richard's shoulder. "Did we win, Papa?" "We won this round, baby girl, but the game isn't over yet." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Will it ever be over?" Richard thought about Volkov, still out there, still dangerous. About Victoria, finally facing justice. About Agent Thompson, who died protecting them. "Yes, sweetheart, it will be over. And when it is, we're going to build the most beautiful life together." 6 months later, Richard stood in the garden of their new home in Virginia, watching Emma play with their golden retriever puppy Justice, a name she'd chosen because he's good and loyal and protects people he loves. The house was modest compared to the Manhattan penthouse, but it was theirs, real, built on truth instead of lies. Volkov had been captured 3 weeks after the courthouse incident, taken down by an international task force in Prague. The intelligence Emma had provided had been crucial. Her description had led to facial recognition software identifying him at a hotel, where surveillance footage revealed his entire support network. Victoria would spend the rest of her life in federal prison. The $42 billion stolen from her victims had been largely recovered from offshore accounts, though the emotional damage to the families would take longer to heal. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Kim. Congressional hearing went well. Emma's testimony sealed the case for new legislation protecting children who report national security crimes. She's a genuine American hero. Emma had indeed testified before Congress, her honest courage helping to pass the Child Witness Protection Act. But more importantly, she'd helped 17 families get their lives back. "Papa!" Emma called from the garden. Justice found something. Richard walked over to where Emma was kneeling beside the puppy, who'd been digging near the fence. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Bulbs. Flower bulbs." Emma held up the dirt-covered treasures. "The people who lived here before us planted them for spring. Should we replant them?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Grandmama always said that when people plant flowers, they're making promises to the future. They're saying they believe good things will grow." As they worked together in the afternoon sun, planting tulips and daffodils for next spring, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, he'd lost everything he thought mattered, but in losing his false life, he'd found his real one. "Papa," Emma said, her small hands carefully patting soil around a bulb. "Do you ever miss being rich?" Richard considered the question seriously. "I miss some things about that life. The security, the comfort, the ability to help people easily." "But not the mean lady?" "No, baby girl, not the mean lady." Emma nodded sagely. "I think maybe you needed to lose the fake family so you could find the real family out of the mouths of babes." Richard looked at his daughter, brilliant, brave, wise beyond her 8 years, and realized she was absolutely right. "Emma, do you know what I'm most grateful for?" "What, Papa?" "That night when you decided to help a sad man you barely knew. You saved my life in every way that matters." Emma smiled, that radiant expression that could light up the darkest moments. "You saved mine too, Papa. Before you, I was just Emma who lived at the children's home. Now I'm Emma Montgomery, and I have a father who keeps his promises." As evening fell, Richard and Emma sat on their front porch, watching the neighbors walk their dogs and children play in yards. It was an ordinary suburban scene, peaceful and safe. "Papa," Emma said, leaning against his arm, "what do you think we'll do tomorrow? What would you like to do? Maybe visit Sister Margaret at the children's home? I want to tell the other kids that good families are real, not just in movies." "That sounds perfect, sweetheart." "And Papa, can we bring Justice? I think the kids would like to meet him." "Of course." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that showed how much she'd grown. "Do you think there are other children out there who need help like I did? Children whose grown-ups aren't keeping their promises?" Richard felt his heart swell with pride and purpose. "Yes, baby girl, I think there are. Then maybe we should help them too. When I'm older, I mean. Maybe we could build a place where children who notice important things get listened to, not ignored." Richard looked at his remarkable daughter, already planning to use her experiences to help others, and realized that Victoria's greatest failure wasn't stealing his money or betraying his trust. Her greatest failure was underestimating the power of love, loyalty, and truth. "Emma Montgomery," he said, "I think you're going to change the world." "We're going to change the world, Papa, together." And as the first stars appeared in the Virginia sky, Richard Montgomery held his daughter close and knew that every loss, every betrayal, every moment of pain had been worth it to arrive at this perfect, ordinary, extraordinary moment. The flowers they'd planted would bloom in spring, just as Emma had said. Promises to the future. Proof that good things grow when they're planted with love and tended with care. Richard and Emma Montgomery were finally, truly home.